This upcoming game is a more sophisticated and more difficult than Fischer's game that we looked. And the reason why it's more difficult because player played with black was much stronger player. Although Volgochin was a good player, player with black was Shirov, and player with white was none other than Gary Kasparov. Well, I have to point it to you that some of it could have been, and I believe it was, some home preparation. But we don't care about this. We care about the way position is played. Whether it was home preparation or it was created on a board, it's still power of positional understanding and playing stays there. Well, very well known Sveshnikov variation of Sicilian defense. As we know, Sveshnikov variation can be played with several different move orders. And this is move order knight db5, d6, bishop f4, e5, bishop g5, a6, knight a3, b5, knight d5, bishop e7. Here, white exchanges dark square bishop to have the very strong outpost on d5 knight. But this is all been played so many times that it's very difficult to prove white's advantage. Well, let's see what happened here. c3, bishop b7, knight c2, knight b8. It's just famous maneuver trying to relocate knight. You see, knight on c6 is restricted by c3 pawn, and black is trying to get knight to a better position. So they went knight b8, a4, b takes a, rook takes a4, knight d7, rook b4, knight c5. In this position, white made a move that can be understood either by very strong player, can be understood, or by other players not that good, if you explain them all essence of the position. And rook takes b7 is the simple sacrifice of a rook for a bishop without visible compensation at first. Knight takes b7 and b4. Let's see what just happened. Let's take the position before the sacrifice. In this position, black has a light square bishop that somehow has a pressure on white's d5 knight. They have very strongly placed knight on c5. By playing rook takes b7, white eliminates that bishop, and what was the strong knight on c5, it made it look absolutely useless. Knight from b7 hardly can come to the game ever. Besides, white has absolutely dominating knight on d5. The other knight will be coming to a3, c4, and they have full control on light squares, where black has a bishop that more of a burden than active piece. It can never be active given this pawn structure. So after b4, I would be very, very unhappy playing this position for black. Bishop g5, knight a3. It's interesting, Rivka says the position is approximately equal because there is a difficulties of put many positional aspects to put it on a computer language. However, she does not give black any advantage at all, having an extra exchange. So after castling knight c4, and black is playing a5. Obviously, white cannot touch the b pawn. B pawn has to stand on b4 at all times to keep knight restricted. That's why you sacrifice a piece to have a couple of useless pieces which fully compensate your material deficit. So after a5, bishop d3, a takes b, c takes b, queen b8, h4. And on bishop h6, knight cb6, rook a2, white castles, rook d2, queen f3. Okay, we made, since sacrifice, we made almost 10 moves. Has black made any progress for their knight on b8? No, and they can't either. After queen f3, queen a7 was played. Right now, white is trying. White won't mind getting their exchange back with knight d7 and knight takes f8, keeping a big positional advantage. So black played in this position queen a7. Then knight d7, knight d8. Well, rook a8 could have been played, but then after bishop c4, you see the threat of knight e7 check. And terrible weakness on f7 makes black's position very scary. And that's where Shirov decided to give up the exchange and trying to put the knight on e6 and d4 to activate the knight. So what happened in the game, knight takes f8, king takes f8, and there is b pawn that was controlling black's knight on b7 all this time. Now it becomes very powerful pass pawn. And after b5, queen a3, queen f5, with a deadly threat of queen d7, this bishop doesn't make any difference if black takes that bishop. Queen d7 will just end the game on the spot. After queen f5, king e8, bishop c4, domination, complete domination continues even after white got the exchange back. Rook c2, now queen takes h7, rook takes c4, and of course it was all precisely calculated by Kasparov. Now knight b6, king e7, knight takes c4. Remember, the position, the combination started where white gave up exchange. They were exchanged down with big positional compensation. Now they are exchanged up. The difference is black has no compensation at all. After knight takes c4, queen c5, there's a rook a1. It's rook a7 is coming in case knight is taken. And this is already not the part that is important. Rook a3 was played. And after bishop c1, another shot, knight e3. Knight is coming to d5 or f5. Of course, in case black takes the bishop, then knight f5 wins the queen and wins all black's pieces as well. So very well conducted game. And I want to make a point here. It's not like a knight versus bishop only. Here is the critical stage of the game, absolutely critical, where white plays a4, take, rook takes, knight d7, and after rook b4, knight c5. In one shot, white makes all black's pieces permanently hopeless. Rook takes b7, eliminating only strong piece, light square bishop, and getting the knight on b7 permanently out of the game. And knight on b7 is terrible. Bishop on f6 is terrible, and white has absolutely dominating pieces. There are no open files, and white's minor pieces, they brought them a deserving win. Very, very powerful game. As I already mentioned, it's difficult to select proper games for this DVD because there are so many of them. And I could never even dream that one of the games out of all thousands that are out there, and one of the games I would select would be game played in 1931, 80 years ago. But nevertheless, I did select this game. The game is very powerful. It was, and at the same time, very easy to understand. Was played, I think it was played perfectly, but none other than Aaron Nimzowitsch. And that's why this person invented a lot of positional aspects that we still use here. And Blockade by Nimzowitsch, this is a good example, and also example of super powerful outpost for the knight. We're going to go quickly through the early stage, the opening stage. We don't want to really concentrate on it. And the knight c3 was played. D takes e, knight takes e4, knight f6, knight g3, c5, bishop b5 check, bishop d7, bishop takes d7, knight bd7. Actually, I don't want to stop even for any comment in the early stage of the game. Knight f3, queen a5 check, c3, queen a6. You see, preventing castling, and if white wants to castle, they have to exchange queens. That's what was played. And rook c8. Black has comfortable position. The position, of course, equal. Castling, e6. Bishop f4, bishop e7. Rook fe1. Knight d5. Bishop g3. And c4. c4 was played to get the outpost for knight on d5. Knight on d5 stands very well. Knight e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, f6, and bishop g3. Now from this point it becomes very instructive. Black has tiny advantage with the knight on d5. In this position, if white plays knight f4, it's black's move, then this advantage will be gone. Knight on d5 will be exchanged, and that's why g5 move is preventive move. It's a prevention against knight f4, keeping knight on d5 as powerful as it is now. G5 is very strong move, F4, and now H6, supporting the G5 pawn, which supports the knight on D5. Rook A D1, King F7, Rook D2. White makes series of pointless moves, but it's hard to suggest anything better because knight on E2 is extremely bad. So after Rook D2, B5, Rook F1, Rook H to E8, Rook F3, and now G4. That's an interesting move. Driving Rook back, and now F5. Now White almost never can exchange the knight on get rid of knight on D5 for black. So at this point, I think black is winning. It's amazing to see how 80 years ago, Nimzovich played this game, and his technique was impeccable, absolutely great. So what do you have to do? You have a knight on D5. How do you win this? You have to create play that will support the presence of the knight. Now, when you go B5 and B4, you have a lot better bishop. You see, dark square bishop, blacks, is much better than white's dark square bishop. So attack should be A5, B4, and try to penetrate on B5. That's exactly what black is aiming for. White plays bishop F2, Rook G8. It's absolutely unnecessary move, but you know, this position is static and no move would make damage to black's position unless they do give up a pawn and make some blunder. So Rook G8, G3, H5, King G2. So far black is not doing progress, but Bishop D6, this position can tolerate loss of tempos. And Bishop D6, Rook C1, H4, Rook D to D1, Rook H8. This is a wrong plan. Eventually Nimzovich coming back to the right plan. There is not much progress can be made on the king side. And the way you can determine it, because you see that if you play on a king side, even if you open H file, you cannot get your knight on D5 and bishop on D6 participate in that attack. So you should play on a queen side, and that's what we're going to see eventually. Rook D2, King E7, Rook D to C2. Now, a series of aimless moves. Rook E1, Rook H7, still hoping to double on H file. Rook A1, H takes G, H takes G, and now black is playing A5. That's something they should have done maybe about 7-8 moves ago. Rook C to C1, Rook C to H8, and Rook to H1. Well, unexpectedly, black gets what they want by opening H file. They exchanged all rooks, and this favors them. Better was to play bishop G1. Well, now those rooks are absolutely useless on H file, and then black would have to swing them to the queen side and continue the queen side play. However, after rook h1, all rooks came off the board. But what did it do for black? Black's rook would have been more active if black played b4. But what did it do is white has two extremely passive pieces. And most important detail about those exchanges that black's king has no problem penetrating on the queen side. With rooks on the board, that would have been a lot more difficult. After b4, king g2, a4. Now threat is a3, and pawn has to be taken. Bishop takes b4, king f1, and there comes the king. King c6, bishop e1, king b5. Now we don't mind exchanging bishops because next move is going to be a3 or c3, and black king penetrates queenside, which will end the game quickly after that. So after king b5, knight c3 check, bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, and now this position is hopelessly lost. You see the perfect example. This is as big of a positional advantage in the end game as you can ever get. Well, material advantage would have been different, but here you have everything you need to win. I guess you even have a lot more than you need to win. King c6, again, we're entering the stage where moves don't make much difference as long as you can go back and forth and eventually get to the position that you need. Knight e4, bishop is absolutely motionless. King e2, king d5, king e3, knight d6. Actually, king d6 was played. And again, as I already explained, this is not an important stage of the game. They repeated position, and now black played knight d6. King e3, knight b5, bishop d2, knight a3, bishop c1, knight b1, and this is ironic that white must play bishop b2. Ironic because this powerful knight that black has and helpless bishop cannot be exchanged by white. If white plays bishop d2, black is going to make this exchange that otherwise look like a blunder to end the game. That's like redeeming your advantage. And after king e4, king e2, and a3, you see next move, black's king penetrates to d3 or f3, and the game is over. That's why in this position, white is forced to play bishop b2, and then a3, bishop a1, and this is totally hopeless. King d6, king e2, king c6. It's a little triangulation. Now if king comes to e3, then after king d5, you see king e4 is going to be next move. And it's interesting to notice that if white plays king f2, after king e4 and king e2, black wins immediately with knight d2 move. And now black is in Zugzwang. King has to take the knight, and after king f3, what black is going to do, take on g3, take on f4, and push the pawns. Bishop on a1 is absolutely useless, smothered, and white has no moves. This position should be treated as a pawn ending because the bishop on a1 is absolutely useless. So the game continued a few more moves in this position, but it's obvious that it's totally hopeless after this, and white resigned very soon. Very clean and very precisely played. Well, when I say precisely, of course, black lost a lot of tempos. Well, they didn't lose, they wasted some moves, not tempos, moves, because when you go back and forth, position doesn't change. So more moves made, but on the wasted tempos, white couldn't take any advantage. So basically, very well played game.